makes them burn.
The Federal Maritime Commission finally released the first of the 3 Ocean Shipping Reform Act mandated and highly anticipated rulemakings. The first rulemaking, defining unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space, has been released as a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. We're going to break it down on today's show. Hi, welcome by Land and by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Beagen, founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies, and I'm your favorite maritime attorney. Join me every week as we walk through both ocean transport and surface transport topics in the wild world of supply chain. And as always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there is no attorney-client privilege created by this video. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So before we get into the discussion of the day, let's go through my top 3 stories of the week. So story number 1, this is great. The Federal Maritime Commission will be having their commission meeting next week, September 21st. They're actually going to be having this meeting over at the Surface Transportation Board offices. I like that. That's unusual. Recently the FMC has been working with STB, the Surface Transportation Board, which a short little overview. The Surface Transportation Board is essentially the Federal Maritime Commission, but for surface transport, for inland transport. So we're talking rail, we're talking a little bit trucking, but more rail. They have been working together, but also for the D&D, the detention and demurrage section, especially as it relates to the rail yards and the storage. So I think this is great that the FMC is going to be having their meeting over there. So that's going to be September 21st at 1 p.m. So it's also going to be virtual. But if you're in town and you'd like to go over there, head on over. You actually can show up in person and watch the commission meeting take place. You can see all the commissioners up on the stage. You can see all of the different directors of the offices making their presentations. It's really a kind of a fun thing to do. So they have 2 matters that are going to be under public consideration and public agenda, and then 2 matters that are going to be under closed session. So the public session is Commissioner Bensel will be giving an update on the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative. Just a little reminder, the MTDI, this is what we were following all last year. It began November, December time of 21 and continued on until their summit on June 1st, 2022. This, remember, is the Transportation Data Initiative. This was Commissioner Bensel was trying to get out there, kind of take inventory of what's out there, what information people need, what information people don't have, what information people do have, and try to find kind of moments where you could combo those needs and wants with haves and already do together, just to see if there were any commonality points. And then the second point is that he was going to be moving forward, trying to work with other federal agencies and finding ways to really ultimately trying to get through to some sort of national data transport portal, or whatever the final presentation or platform might be. So the second item under the agenda on the public session is a staff briefing on the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. You may have seen that the FMC actually has a landing page on their website that talks about all the different things that they have done. They have a tick list of all the things that they've done or they're working on that have been mandated under the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. You'll see a lot of things on that list already. Most recently, the newest rulemaking that we're going to talk about today, but also the emergency order rulemaking that came out it just concluded this Wednesday, September 14th. There's over 40 comments filed on that. I recommend you go take a look at that emergency order rulemaking, or actually not rulemaking, request for information. So 2 items under the closed session, like I said, staff briefing on detention and demurrage billing requirements. That's the second rulemaking that we're expecting to come out. I would expect that would probably be moving pretty quickly now, especially if there's a staff briefing. Maybe that means that they're getting ready to release some language for that rulemaking. And then there's a staff briefing on charge complaints. At the last commission meeting, we heard that there were 7 charge complaints filed at that point, and that was the end of July. I think that they had released the interim guidance on charge complaints early mid-July, so really only a few weeks, and they had 7 charge complaints. And at that time, they said only actually 4 charge complaints could be investigated and continued. Probably mostly because maybe the items were prior to the June 16th kind of start date that charge complaints can't be looked at unless they happened on or after June 16th, which is the date that OSRA was signed into law. As we all know, I cover it every week. But so I think this is going to be a great commission hearing. I don't know. I just love it when the FMC gives updates like this, whether it's on their website or on their meetings. The meetings really have a lot of great information. And actually at the last commission meeting is when I learned that it was a initiate rulemaking by 30, 45, and 60 day, not the publish rulemaking by 30s, 45, and 60 day. I had mistakenly or maybe strictly read that initiate a rulemaking to be that the FMC had to publish that rules information. So I was doing a countdown. I was like, they're late. What's going on? At the last commission hearing meeting at, July 27th, I believe the date was, Chairman Maffei actually addressed that and said, we're not late. The language actually said initiate a rulemaking. Which he says we have done. It doesn't say publish. I went back and checked it. He's right. It says initiate. So that happened at the last commission meeting. I'm so interested to hear just little comments here and there that might clear things up for a lot of us listening. So I'm going to watch that, and I hope you'll join me. Item number 2 for the day. Rail and port union strikes are diverted. For now. I put 2 articles in the show notes here. I'm not going to say much. There was a lot going on this week, right? I mean, I think the whole world learned that the rail unions were about to go on strike. And I mean, shoot, we were already having some of those rail carriers start to close down operations and not accept hazmat materials, not accept refrigerated cargo. I mean, gosh, I put this in a post. Once you start slowing down and closing off refrigerated cargo, I mean, that's food, right? That's food. That's medicine. That's chemicals. That's what needs to be refrigerated and maintained at a certain refrigeration level. I mean, hazmat's also important, but the consumer feel of the refrigerated cargo. And look, the agreement didn't come until late Thursday, early Friday morning. So there were some impacts, and I think we're still going to be, late Wednesday night into Thursday morning. But some of these impacts I think we're still going to feel. This is a very fluid thing. But that's all I'm going to say. Rail and port union strikes have been diverted for now. There were some reports that maybe this kicked the can a little further down, which actually this moment was a kick the can from a previous cooling off period. I've also read that the rail workers are feeling backed into a corner here and that they have to take the deal. I don't know. I was reading a little bit about it, and they were talking about kind of the work-life balance, right? And I feel like it's the years of the employee, it's the years of the laborer, it's the years of the standing up and trying to rebalance. The engineers, I believe it was, are required to be on call 7 days a week. That's 7 days a week. That's 7 days of a week. That's a week. Every single day they're required to be on call. They can never really go take a break. I don't know the nuances of that. Maybe that was actually an overly simplified way of talking about it. But look, I 7 days a week, every week for 365 days a year, that seems too much. I hope they get it all figured out. I'm going to keep watching. I think we all are going to. Story number 3. Look, be careful introducing tonnage taxes on carriers. Stephanie Loomis, I don't know if you follow her. You definitely should on LinkedIn. She has some great insights generally, but had some great insights on tonnage taxes on carriers. I've said it before. These insanely high billion dollar profits are not the norm for these ocean carriers, and they're not going to stay the norm. Look, there were many, many, many years that the carriers were lucky to break even some lost money. I'm going to say that again. Some years, these carriers who are now collecting billions were lucky to break even and even had a overall year that they lost money. A lot of people have come into this supply chain industry recently, and they don't know that. They don't know that the ocean carriers were not always this big, bad, big conglomerate of billion-dollar profits. So Stephanie highlights in a recent post saying, and I'm going to quote her here, "The bottom line seems to me, and by many who have studied it, that the freight rates and therefore the profits gained were mostly driven by the market. Is it a bit disturbing and aggravating that they got lucky while the market went haywire? Sure. But should tax policy long in place be upended due to what was I certainly hope, once in a lifetime situation?" End quote. Look, I agree. I agree with her here. Is it a little bit hard to stomach that maybe they just got lucky? Maybe when the markets went up, they just really were the beneficiaries in the billions with a B, of the profits here. But should we be taxing them for this anomaly? It's an anomaly. It really is. So Stephanie continues, and I quote, "Carriers also lived through the exact opposite scenario in 2008-09 when the global economy collapsed and volumes dried up and they lost billions." Like I said, they lost money some years, and some of them lost in the billions. Continuing the quote, "To tax them differently based on these insane amounts of profits may seem like justification if they are to be blamed for what happened, but they really are not." End quote. Like, exactly. I've said it before. The ocean carriers are not necessarily the bad guys. Maybe they're doing some bad stuff. Maybe there was some bad stuff happening. There were some funky charges. The FMC is on it. They're trying to rein all that in. They're putting guardrails out there. They're cleaning it up just so that general invoices have some consistency to them, and that you can't profiteer as much on kind of the chaos anymore because the FMC is getting involved here. I've said almost this very same thing previously, and I wholeheartedly agree with what Stephanie's saying here. Let's not jump in on knee-jerk reactions. These are anomalies. Let's let the market level out and see what the new norm is. The rates are already down sub $4,000 for West Coast to Asia. Excuse me. And with October, November being the traditionally slowest months, we may see that drop even more. So we're sub 4,000 on a TEU here, and we may see that drop even more. Look, the norm, let's kind of put a baseline here. The norm pre-pandemic was around $2,000 for that same container. We got up to about $20,000 at the peak. We're now down to just under 4,000. With 2,000 being our norm pre-pandemic. Are we going to go below 2,000? I don't know, right? Wouldn't that be crazy? We go from the highest high, they're making billions of dollars, to now we're going to be going below pre-pandemic levels. I mean, we are in inflation right now. Buying power might be limiting. People are buying services maybe a little bit more than they're buying goods and things. Look, I don't know. The point being, taxing these guys right now while their freight rates are dropping out, maybe it's not the right time. They got lucky with the billions of profits. That's great for them. I hope that they reinvest it into technology so that they can have more of a digital freight platform so that we can all kind of have a little bit more visibility over where our cargo is. But look, they're also buying ships, and more ships means more capacity, and more capacity means the rates go down. And if we're having prices drop out and more capacity, so capacity meaning just more ships, more availability of space for the cargo to move. If you can't fill up all these ships, the prices are going to go down. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. We're not done here with the crazy. It's going to continue to be interesting. So, look, that was all interesting, but let's get into the meat and potatoes of the day here. So it all goes back to OSRA, doesn't it? It always goes back to OSRA. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act. It was kind of talked about. Is it going to happen? Is it going to not? It went into effect June 16th, and here we are still talking about all the implementation and all the different things that it mandated the FMC to do. We've been waiting for this one. So, a little briefer. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 had a very long list to do for the FMC. So remember, OSRA 22 was passed using the Senate version. There was a House version and a Senate version. The House version was arguably a little bit more export heavy. There were also some things that it might have been a little duplicative of what the FMC already had authority to do. So I was happy to see the Senate version get picked up. Senate version got picked up. went over to the House passed that, Senate passed it, and it got signed by the president on June 16, 2022, and it became law that day. We've talked about it. There were some immediate effects that it had, but we've been waiting on these 3 rulemakings that OSRA 22, Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022, required the FMC to initiate. These 3, the 3 highly anticipated rulemakings, they are unreasonable refusal to deal with respect to vessel space. That was required to be initiated 30 days from June 16th. So we were looking at a mid-July initiation. Again, remember, I thought that the initiation meant publishing. So I was like, where is it? It's mid-July. Initiate only meant start internally. So here we are mid-September. So, that's not a 30-day from the June 16th. The next rulemaking that I'm anticipating, a detention and demurrage prohibited practices, that was 45 days from the signing of June 16th. So the detention and demurrage prohibited practices, that's on the agenda for next week. I don't know if that means that they're going to be passing some language or agreeing on some language that then they're going to publish, or if that just means they're going to talk about it because they have some questions. They want to talk about it in their closed session, pre-deliberative closed session, so that they can get some of the language right. I'm not sure, but I'm happy to see that it's on the agenda because it means it's the next one coming and they're moving on it. So detention and demurrage prohibited practices is the second rulemaking that we're waiting for. And then the third rulemaking is the unfair, unjust, discriminatory methods. That is 60 days from the June 16th. They were required to initiate that. So that one I haven't heard much on. Arguably probably the biggest beast of the bunch, but they all kind of have their challenges. So here we are. So the first one has been released. So rulemaking on unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space and vessel space accommodations. So not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of this act, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, the FMC, in consultation with the Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard, shall initiate a rulemaking defining unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space. So that's what the law said. That's what OSRA said. The Federal Maritime Commission shall issue a final rule not later than 6 months after the date of enactment of this act. So basically, they're saying that this rule needed to be started within 30 days after the June 16th, and it has to be finished up within 6 months. So 6 months from June 16th, that's December, right? I mean, July, August, September, October, November, December. That's December 16th. This has to be closed up. So here we are. It got released 2 days ago, on the 14th, or this week. And now here we are. It's on a 30-day comment period, and it has to be closed up within 6 months. So look, unreasonable refusal to deal is a beast of a subject in itself. They really, all 3 of them are. I'm not sure that this can be, well, we'll see. They're doing some definitions. We'll see if this can be finished up by December. I've been saying for a while, get your thoughts together. I was expecting this to move pretty quickly. Look, I was thinking, why don't you start putting together your thoughts? Do you have instances where you had a carrier unreasonably refuse to engage with you in business? Did you have an instant where you were denied vessel space? Start pulling your examples together. Now is the time because it's open. Let's pull our examples together on being denied vessel space. This is only a 30-day comment period. So this rulemaking was released as a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So let's go over kind of the constructs of what rulemakings are. We've previously seen the ANPRM, so the Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. We saw that with the detention and demurrage rule last spring, April, I believe. With recent rulemakings, we've seen the ANPRM. We saw a notice of, the Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So what is the ANPRM? Really, the ANPRM, what we saw with the detention and demurrage is they're casting a wide net. They're kind of polling the industry before they start pulling together language. That's not this. They are jumping right into it. They're jumping into the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So this is not an advance notice. This is a notice. They have some language put together. And they're saying, this is really the direction we want to go with this. Any thoughts, any hesitations, any major concerns, this is a great chance to weigh in because, look, it's not polling the industry, but it's basically saying, we have some thoughts. We think that we can fix this, but we want to put it out to the industry first. dive in on this. It's a little dense, but I think that you're going to really enjoy reading through it. Go slow. Highlight pieces. It talks a little bit about justifications for why they define the way that they do. But this notice of proposed rulemaking, the next step is a final rule. So this is your chance to weigh in. This is the moment where you weigh in on the comments. The next step is a final rule. And after the final rule, assuming they don't get any really controversial comments at the final rule stage, it's a law. So, or it becomes a regulation, I should say. So here's your chance. This is it. The notice of proposed rulemaking is your chance. So let's dive into it. What exactly is happening? And I apologize, I have a little bit of a cold today. So unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations provided by an ocean common carrier. So the FMC is proposing to define the elements necessary to establish a violation and the criteria it will consider in assessing reasonableness. So again, this is a 30-day comment filing period. The FMC states that this definition would work in conjunction with some laws that are already out there, which was amended by OSRA 2022. So it's amended. It's working in conjunction with 46 USC 41104A10. It's the law. So which that was amended by OSRA to prohibit a common carrier, either alone or in conjunction with any person, directly or indirectly, from unreasonably refusing to deal or negotiate. So it's working in conjunction with a law that already talks about unreasonably refusing to deal or negotiate, including with respect to vessel space provided by an ocean common carrier. So OSRA amended Section 41104A by replacing may not with shall not. Shall not prohibit a common carrier from unreasonably refusing. So noting that this prohibition includes dealings and negotiations with respect to vessel space accommodations provided by an ocean common carrier. So that's what we're talking about here. Remember, this is about vessel space accommodations. So here's where we get into the definitions. They start defining some things. The phrase ocean common carrier is currently defined as a vessel operating common carrier in the Shipping Act. However, other key terms, the FMC says, other key terms and phrases in the Shipping Act, unreasonable, refusal to deal or negotiate, vessel space accommodations are not defined. I mean, those are big ones to define. So let's define them. That's what the FMC is saying. Let's define them. So here's what they're proposing. Vessel space accommodations. Defined generally as space provided aboard a vessel of an ocean common carrier for laden containers being imported to or exported from the U.S. This proposed definition is based on the common meaning of the words and the phrases applied to the ocean shipping. Not too controversial, right? What is vessel space? And they're saying it's basically laden containers being imported or exported. Okay, if you think that that should be expanded or changed, dive right in. I think that that's probably going to be pretty shored up language. But, you know, this is your moment. They are proposing these definitions. So next definition or for the phrase, refusal to deal or negotiate. The FMC says this doesn't really lend itself to a great general definition and instead needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So the FMC is saying, in general, a refusal to deal or negotiate presumes that in order for there to be a refusal, there first must be something to refuse. So in other words, the FMC says a party has attempted in good faith to engage in discussions with an ocean common carrier for the purpose of obtaining vessel space accommodations. This good faith attempt is something more than one communication with no response or reply. Good faith attempt is something more than one communication with no response. So refusal to deal is a party has attempted in good faith to engage in discussions. The party must prove an actual refusal to even entertain the proposal or to engage in good faith discussions. So they're moving into negotiations here, right? They're trying to put some reins on the ability to negotiate for the vessel space. Likewise, an ocean common carrier's refusal to deal or negotiate is only a violation if it's unreasonable. And the FMC continues on to describe whether the ocean common carrier gave good faith consideration to a party's efforts at the negotiation stage. So the FMC continues into reasonableness. And this is all, like I said, this is all in the rulemaking. They really are trying to explain their rationale, what they're thinking as they're defining these. They don't just want to throw out the definition. They would like the industry to come on the journey with them. Here's what we're thinking. Here's why we want to define it this way. And so they're talking about all of that. I love that the FMC does this because it really kind of helps explain where they're coming from. And also it helps inform how they will be applying these in the future, because they're saying these are going to be very case by case basis. So to understand the rationale for why and how they were determined, these definitions, is going to be so key for how they will apply them on these case by case bases. So reasonableness. Case law indicates that reasonableness of the refusal to deal or negotiate has historically been interpreted broadly in this context. And the FMC says courts even defer to the Commission's reading of that term in administering its statutes and regulations. The Commission has previously found reasonable those decisions that are connected to a legitimate business decision or motivated by legitimate transportation factors. I mean, I guess you could say what's the definition of legitimate, but they're not going into that here. So reasonableness can be given its dictionary definition, but is judged on a case-by-case basis with particular attention paid to the relevant circumstances. The Commission has said that a just and reasonable practice is one otherwise lawful, but not excessive and suited to the end in view. So just and reasonable practice, otherwise lawful but not excessive, and suited to the end in view. The Commission has found various situations that inform what refusal to deal entails, and it's found that a common carrier must avoid shutting out any person or party for reasons not connected to legitimate transportation-related factors. This is where it gets really interesting. So, I apologize, I'm reading a little bit directly from the language of what the FMC has put out there, but I'm going to break it all down too. But look, they're defining reasonableness here, and they said that they found various situations what refusal to deal looks like. They're about to give an example that's really interesting. So a common carrier must therefore give actual consideration to the other party's efforts or attempts to negotiate. They're saying they actually have to, if another party is attempting to negotiate. So in this situation, if a shipper is trying to negotiate with a common carrier, they have to give actual consideration to that attempt at negotiation. So the example, a common carrier, this is the FMC's example, a common carrier's repeated refusal to respond to email or telephone requests for negotiations over an extended period of time may be viewed as an unreasonable method of shutting another party out. This is really interesting because I've heard a lot of BCOs and shippers say that they have been trying to call and call and call and call. And they end up getting nowhere, almost like they've been given a fake number. Now, to be fair, most of the time that I've heard those discussions and those situations and examples, it's been for detention and demurrage. It's been for trying to talk and figure out and dispute, create a resolution over the dispute for detention and demurrage. But, I mean, the FMC is just kind of addressing it here, saying you can't do that. In this respect, it's about negotiation for vessel space. I mean, that's what the whole rulemaking is about. But they really don't keep pulling it back to vessel space. They're kind of just saying reasonableness includes not answering a phone, or unreasonableness includes not answering a phone. That's interesting because they're not saying unreasonable vessel space. They're just saying it's just unreasonable. Look, I see you, FMC. I see what you're doing here. You're trying to, I agree. Look, the BCOs and the shippers are upset because, like I said, I've heard that they feel like they've been given fake numbers. And if you keep trying and trying and trying and nobody's answering, that's frustrating. Again, I apologize for this cold. So also I found it interesting. The FMC gets into a discussion of export loads versus import loads. So export loads, they say on average, are heavier than import loads. So remember, there was a big discussion over imports were coming in, but exports were being denied. U.S. exports were being denied. The ship was basically just dropping their imports, turning back around, trying to grab the $20,000 loads, and pulling them back over from Asia to the West Coast. So they're talking about that here. The FMC gets into the discussion of the export loads and the import loads. So export loads are, on average, heavier than import loads. This means that ships that came into U.S. ports largely laden with goods cannot safely load the same number of laden 20-foot equivalents when leaving the U.S. for foreign ports. They're saying the imports are heavier, and so it's an imbalance. You can't quite take these empties, only empties, because it's safety of life, it's sea matters, it's the VGM issues. Remember VGM from a couple years ago? We'll cover that in another. But basically, it was an economic thing that found its way into safety of life at sea. It had to do with the weight of the containers and having accurate and reportable weights, because that affected the safety of the vessels transiting. So there's a big section justifying why there's an export versus import trade imbalance. The reason to state that there should be a trade imbalance, but they understand why there's a trade imbalance. It's kind of a nod to, we get it. There were some operational difficulties, economic difficulties, etc. But the FMC is basically saying, look, you should still make an effort. So they said, while some exports markets have been affected by trade shocks, such as China's ban on solid waste imports and other items, these trade shocks do not fully explain the drop in total exports carried. Neither do safety concerns over ship loading. They're saying even though imports are heavier and exports are lighter, and may cause some vessel safety concern, and certainly solid waste imports that previously China used to take these solid waste imports, and now that they don't because of a ban, they're saying that those certainly factor in, but they don't justify the full trade shock. So they continue to say, largely these changes can be explained by carrier operational decisions. They're saying the carriers are making these decisions. So they're saying, but maybe they're making them based on equipment availability and differential revenues from import and export transportation. They're giving them a little bit of an out with the equipment availability, but the differential revenues from import and export transportation, that's a biggie, right? It was $20,000 to bring a carrier in, but it was nowhere near that to take it out. So carrier operational decisions are why there's an import-export balance. The FMC says VOCCs should offer service, so ocean carriers, vessel-owning common carriers, should offer service in both directions within the trade lanes in which they operate in common carriage, regardless of trade lane, length of time active in the trade, or vessel size. Length of time active in the trade. There were some new vessels, right? I think we all heard about that were, like I said, only picking up imports and then turning straight around, not even waiting for an export, an empty export. They were just turning right around and grabbing more from China because they wanted to catch that quick cash. So the FMC is saying, in other words, an ocean carrier may not categorically exclude U.S. exports from a backhaul trip without showing how this action is reasonable. The carrier must show why not taking the export is reasonable. So kind of addressing that quick turn. You only drop an import and you leave because you want to catch the quick cash. They're saying that's categorically excluding the exports. Not okay. So the FMC imports discussion. In addition to the challenges faced by exporters, there have also been reports of restricted access to equipment and vessel capacity for U.S. importers, particularly in the Trans-Pacific market. Access to import vessel space was impacted by congestion, equipment availability, and vessel-owning common carrier commercial decisions. So they talk about a burden shift of rationale for not accepting cargo to the carrier. Ocean common carriers and those with whom they contract to operate and load and unload their vessels have the best information on the ability of any particular vessel to accept cargo for import or export. Shippers generally don't have access to this information. I mean, that's so huge that the FMC is recognizing that. Therefore, while the ultimate burden of proving a violation of the section 41104, so we were talking about that earlier, will remain with the complainant, so the person bringing the case, or with the previously known as the Bureau of Enforcement, the Bureau of Enforcement Investigations and Compliance. This proposed rule includes a mechanism by which, upon just looking at the violation, the burden shifts from the shipper or to the Bureau of Enforcement Investigations and Compliance, BEIC, from the shipper to the now ocean common carrier. So basically, the ocean common carrier must establish that its refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space which in some cases results in a decision not to accept cargo, was reasonable. They have to explain why it was reasonable. It's important to clarify that the proposed rule concerns the negotiation or discussions that lead up to a decision about whether an import or export load is accepted. There will undoubtedly, the Commission says, there will undoubtedly be situations where an ocean common carrier and a shipper engage in good faith negotiations or discussions that do not result in a provision of transportation. However, a situation where an ocean common carrier categorically excludes U.S. exports will create a presumption of unreasonable refusal to deal. So if these carriers are categorically excluding exports, the FMC is saying, we're assuming that's unreasonable refusal to deal. That now, if you want to get categorical exclusions of exports are now categorical unreasonable refusal to deal. So the proposed rule first lists the elements necessary to establish a violation and then lays out the criteria the Commission will consider in evaluating the reasonableness of the refusal, including a burden-shifting regime. In proposing the rule, the Commission acknowledges that it is impossible to regulate for every possible scenario and that case-by-case is still important, factually driven and determined on case-by-case. But the three elements to establish a violation for unreasonable refusal to deal are: the respondent is an ocean common carrier under FMC jurisdiction, okay? The respondent, so the respondent, so it's the complainant and the respondent. So the person who brings the case and the person who's responding to the case, or the other side. The respondent's ocean common carrier. The respondent refuses to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel accommodations, and that the refusal is unreasonable. So it has to be that the actual refusal is unreasonable. Once the person who brings the case has established, on the face for each of the three elements, the ocean common carrier will have the burden. The ocean common carrier will then have the burden of production to show or justify why that refusal was reasonable. So immediately it goes over. So the complainant, they bring the case, they outline these three things, and then immediately the ocean common carrier has to respond and say why the refusal was reasonable. They could say, well, there were no empties available. There were no chassis to move the empties over. There were no appointments. That maybe there was some sort of operational. Maybe they knew that there was weather coming in. I mean, I don't know what the reasonableness is. Like I said, they're going to make this a case-by-case basis. The rulemaking does say that the ultimate burden of persuasion still remains with the complainant, the person bringing the suit, to show that the refusal to deal or negotiate was unreasonable. They have to show that it was unreasonable and that the proposed rule includes a general presumption of unreasonableness when there's a categorical exclusion. Okay. So reasonableness in kind of a business standpoint. So the Commission continues to acknowledge that its role is not to ensure that all interested parties get the same deal or make a certain profit. They're saying, look, we're not trying to kind of neutralize the market. We're just trying to throw some guardrails down. They're not saying that everybody should get the same deal or that so-and-so needs to make a certain profit. The Commission's saying that their role is to ensure that parties are not precluded from obtaining preferential treatment due to unreasonable or unjustly discriminatory reasons. So they can't categorically close out one section but then let in the other guys because they're going to be paying a higher rate. The Commission further recognizes that an ocean common carrier does not have a duty to grant a contract to every potential party. So just because you say, no, I can't do that, doesn't mean that that's automatically unreasonable. They're saying, you don't have to accept every deal out there, and we're not going to make you. And we're not going to make it so that everybody has to be treated equally, but they do have to be treated fairly, I think is what I'm reading here. So upon establishing its criteria for granting preferential terms to parties who are able to meet those specified terms, the ocean common carrier then has a duty under the Shipping Act to apply such criteria in a consistent and fair manner. Consistent and fair manner. There it is, fair manner, without differentiating based on illegitimate transportation factors. Common carrier may be viewed as having acted reasonably in its business discretion to proceed with a certain arrangement over another by taking into account such factors as profitability and compatibility with its business development strategy. So you can go for the profit, you can, but they're saying you just have to explain it. You have to let us know what's going on here because we don't want it to be a categorical exclusion. And we really don't want it to be really unfair, categorically unfair. I mean, we're talking general, big things here. So the proposed text. So it starts out with the purpose. The provision established the elements and definitions necessary for the commission with respect to vessel space accommodations provided by an ocean common carrier. This includes complaints brought before the commission by a private party or enforcement cases brought by the commission. So that's the former Bureau of Enforcement. Now it's the BEIC. Definitions. This is the actual text of the law that they're proposing. They're proposing a new CFR. So remember, the Congress creates statutes, which is the USC, the United States Code, and then the Commission interprets that and turns those into CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. And those Code of Federal Regs, so that is 46 CFR, and then the 500s is where the FMC lies. So this would be section 542, a new 542.1. So continuing on, the definitions. Transportation factors means, for the purpose of this section, factors that encompasses the genuine operational considerations underlying an ocean common carrier's practical ability to accommodate laden cargo for import or export, which can include, without limitation, vessel safety, stability, scheduling. They're basically saying, here's some transportation factors you could be considering. Unreasonable means, for the purpose of the section, an ocean common carrier's refusal to deal or negotiate as prohibited under the Shipping Act. In evaluating an ocean common carrier's actions, the Commission will consider the following factors without limitation when deciding whether a refusal to deal or negotiate is unreasonable. The factors, like we said earlier, whether the ocean common carrier follows a documented export strategy that enables the efficient movement of export cargo. Okay, maybe there's a larger strategy. Whether the ocean common carrier engaged in good faith negotiations and made business decisions that were subsequently applied in a fair and consistent manner. They entered into so just because somebody brings a case saying, they didn't give me the deal, doesn't mean that it wasn't in good faith and it wasn't a fair determination. You can't say every time you don't get a deal with an ocean common carrier that it was unreasonable. No, and that's what they're saying. Look, we're not going after the ocean carriers. We're just saying keep it fair. Continuing on with these factors, the existence of legitimate transportation factors, which they defined earlier, and any other factors that the Commission deems relevant. Look, they said this is all going to be case by case. We're going to have to look at every case that comes before us. There's probably things that we're not considering here, but these are kind of the first things that we've seen in our history of case law and in the unreasonable refusal arena that come up as problems. Continuing on, vessel space accommodations under the definitions. For the purpose of the section, space provided aboard a vessel of an ocean common carrier for laden containers being imported to or exported from the U.S. That one was also an easy one. So, elements. This is the actual text of the law. Like I said, elements. In order to establish a successful private party or enforcement claim for refusal to deal or negotiate, the respondent must be an ocean common carrier. Respondent refuses to deal or negotiate, including with respect to vessel space, and the refusal is unreasonable. That's interesting. Number 2. So number 1, must be ocean common carrier. Number 2, refuses to deal or negotiate, including with respect to vessel space. They're leaving that open, so it doesn't have to include vessel space accommodations. That could just be generally unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate. That's interesting. I wonder if they're leaving that open for detention and demurrage thoughts. I don't know. It says including with respect to vessel space accommodations. You might want to pull up this proposed language. It's at the very, very end of the rulemaking. Dive into it. Read through their justifications, but then read through the actual proposed language here. And then 3, the refusal is unreasonable. So then there's a section that talks about shifting a burden of production. So the burden to establish a violation on this part is with the complainant, the person who brings the case. Once a complainant sets forth a prima facie case of a violation, so they bring forth the violation, the assumed violation, the burden shifts to the ocean common carrier to justify that its actions were reasonable. So that's where the common carrier basically has to say, no, and here's why. Here's why it was reasonable. This justification may take the form of a certification by an appropriate representative of the ocean common carrier to attest that the decision and supporting evidence is correct and complete. So they want a certification. Once that reasonableness explanation comes in, they want somebody to certify that as well. And they're saying a compliance officer can do that. They talk about that a little bit in the rulemaking. We didn't cover that here today, but that's also something that I'm going to be interested to see if there's any comments about that certification. This is loaded with stuff that could be commented on, right? I think that this is, they have to finish this up by December. There's a lot in here. I mean, there's a lot that they are fixing, but there's a lot of creeping around, right? I mean, they're getting a little bit past just vessel space. They're going into negotiations. They're trying to create fairness across the board. I don't know. I kind of like the direction it's heading. So look, I've talked about this before. Maybe we'll cover it again. I'll probably do a post on my LinkedIn. Make sure to follow me. But how do you file comments with the FMC? General best practices here. I'm not going to go into all the details, but if you want to file comments here, make sure that you make it easy for the line attorney to understand what you're trying to say. Keep it simple. So introduce who you are, who's your company, and then talk about your role in the industry. If you didn't already do it in your introduction, talk about your role in the industry. What's the nature of your business? How do you negotiate for vessel space? Or how do you have unreasonable or unfair practices happening against you? Unreasonable refusal to deal. And then you start your comments. These can include stories, examples, general perceptions, and perspectives. I thought that the comments that came in, especially at the end, were really good on the emergency order. Take a look at those. There were some really well-crafted. They want you to be very focused on the rulemaking at hand, the issue at hand. Stay focused. Keep your comments related to that. And then if you can, make a suggestion. Again, this is not legal advice. This is just kind of best practices on how to file comments. I'd be happy to help you if you have any questions on that. Reach out to me through Squall Strategies. But remember, these comments are generally public unless you specifically request to file them confidentially. There's a whole method for how to file confidentially, but in general, they are published publicly, which is great because then you and I can go watch the comments as they come in and see who's saying what and see what other insights the industry wants to include or not include. So that's it. We have a month. Look, FMC tends to accept late filed comments, so if you find yourself up against the deadline and don't make it, still submit them. We're looking at probably like an October 14, 15, 16. It all depends on when it got published in the Federal Register. But it is a 30-day filing for comments. So I would say just kind of put October 14th in your sights and try to have your comments prepared before that. We've been asking to have a voice. These rulemakings and requests for informations are that chance. This is a great chance to weigh in. This is the unreasonable refusal to deal. This is why it has been such an emotional ride for BCOs and for shippers because they felt like they were being blocked out. I think that this has a big part of that, certainly for exporters. But in general, this is your moment to talk about that. If you've been feeling blocked out by ocean common carriers through negotiations for vessel space or otherwise, like I said, they're kind of opening this up for or otherwise. Get your thoughts together, send them over. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes. It should not be construed to be legal advice directly related to your matter. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. But if you have specific legal questions, feel free to reach out to me at my legal company, Squall Strategies. And for other non-legal questions, e-learning, general industry information, and insights, come find me at the Maritime Professor. And make sure to sign up for our email because next week there's some big stuff happening with the e-courses. So if you like these videos, let me know. Comment, like, and share. If you missed any previous videos, these videos live on my YouTube page by Land and by Sea, presented by the Maritime Professor. And while you're at it, check out the website, maritimeprofessor.com. If you miss any of these episodes, they live on a podcast. You can reach them on demand. We cover a whole host of issues. Go check them out. They're really well categoried, and you can check out our old issues. The title itself explains what you're talking about. So look, until next week, this is Lauren Beagen, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and by Sea. See you next time.